never, ever confuse the word verse with poetry, because you can have heightened blank verse and you can have naturalistic blank verse. I left no ring with her. What means this lady? That's naturalistic. And heightened is when it's full of metaphor and simile. Cleopatra uses a lot of heightened verse. But it doesn't mean poetry, because people all over the world tend to put on a funny voice when they speak poetry. There is none of my uncle's marks upon you. He taught me how to know a man in love, in which cage of rushes I'm sure you're not prisoner. A lean cheek, which you have not. A blue eye and sunken, which you have not. An unquestionable spirit, which you have not. A beard neglected, which you have not. But I pardon you for that, for your simply having in beard is a younger brother's revenue. Then your hose should be ungartered, your bonnet unbanded, your sleeve unbuttoned, your shoe untied, and everything about you demonstrating a careless desolation. But you're no such man. You rather point to vice in your accoutrements, as loving yourself than seeming the lover of any other.
So far, almost all of the Shakespearean text we've explored in this course has been in verse, which looks like poetry on the page. In practical terms, we can tell it's in verse on the page because every 10 syllables or so, the writing drops down to the next line and starts over again from the left margin. And the new verse line is indicated with a capital letter at the beginning of the next line. But the passage from Shakespeare that you just heard actress Jane Lapater recite looks like this. This passage from As You Like It doesn't follow verse form at all. Instead, it appears in regular paragraph form, like most modern playwriting. A good deal of Shakespeare, possibly as much as a third, is written in prose. In only 3 of his plays do the characters speak no prose at all: Richard II, Henry VI, Parts 1 and 3, and King John. In contrast, his play The Merry Wives of Windsor is almost all prose, with barely any verse. In the rest of Shakespeare's plays, characters regularly switch between verse and prose when they speak, with some using more of one than another. When and why does Shakespeare switch from verse to prose? And how do actors navigate those switches? These questions will be the focus of our investigation of experiencing Shakespeare on the page and the stage in this lesson. Consider this scene from Much Ado About Nothing, where a young woman named Hero has been publicly disgraced at her wedding after being accused of infidelity. Once everyone leaves, her cousin Beatrice shares her frustration with Benedick.
Lady Beatrice, have you wept all this while?
Yea, and I will weep a while longer.
I will not desire that.
Have no reason. I do it freely.
Surely I do believe your fair cousin is wrong.
Oh, how much might the man deserve of me that would right her?
Is there any way to show such friendship?
Very even way. No such friend.
May a man do it?
It is a man's office, but not yours.
I do love nothing in the world so well as you. It's not that strange?
As strange as the thing I know not. It were as possible for me to say I love nothing so well as you. But believe me not, and yet I lie not. I confess nothing, nor I deny nothing. I am sorry for my cousin.
By my sword, Beatrice, thou lovest me.
Do not swear and eat it.
I will swear by it that you love me, and I will make him eat it that says I love not you.
Will you not eat your word?
With no sauce that can be devised to it. I protest, I love thee.
Why then, God forgive me.
What offense, sweet Beatrice?
You have stayed me in a happy hour. I was about to protest I loved you.
And do it with all thy heart.
I love you with so much of my heart that none is left to protest.
Come, bid me do anything for thee.
Kill Claudio.
Not for the wide world.
Kill me to deny it. Farewell.
Tarry, sweet Beatrice.
I am gone, though I am here. There is no love in you. Nay, I pray you, let me go.
Beatrice.
In faith, I will go.
We'll be friends first.
You dare easier be friends with me than fight with mine enemy?
Is Claudio thine enemy?
Is he not approved in the height of villain that has slandered, scorned, dishonored my kinswoman? Oh, that I were a man. What, bear her in hand until they come to take hands, and then, with public accusation, uncovered slander, unmitigated rancor, oh God, that I were a man, I would eat his heart in the marketplace.
Thanks, Cam Brooke. In this scene, and much of the rest of the play, Beatrice and Benedick use prose as their language of choice. Their sentences in the first half of the exchange are relatively short. They don't have to be 10 syllables per line, which might encourage a clipped rhythm as the characters struggle to decide what to say to each other, neither of them having much experience with words of love. The clipped, shorter sentences also allow for a faster, more urgent pattern of dialogue between them. And Beatrice's longer rant is freewheeling, not bound by the usual verse structure. She's so furious here that she would probably not be able to stay within the verse's tidy 10-beat expectations anyway. And by having Benedick respond to her command to kill Claudio with, "Ha, not for the wide world," Shakespeare buys him space for thought and allows for a word like ha, which can be thought of as a word or even a gasp. Actors are often taught that Shakespeare's upper-class characters speak more verse, while his lower-class characters use more prose. And that's perhaps generally true, but it's also an oversimplification. In Much Ado About Nothing, for instance, this isn't true at all. Most of that whole play is written in prose. This might be because the characters you just heard, Beatrice and Benedick, aren't romantics. In fact, they are such reluctant lovers that they get all the way to the scene we just heard in Act 4 before they confess their feelings for each other at all. And as you've heard, even while acknowledging their love, they remain plain-spoken characters who can't believe they're saying these crazy things. So they simply say exactly what they mean. No need for verse. So while other sets of Shakespearean lovers, especially young ones like Romeo and Juliet, use soaring verse to express their feelings, neither Benedick nor Beatrice has much patience for poetry or formal pageantry. The rules about when and why Shakespeare switches between verse and prose aren't always consistent, but a close exploration of these switches from verse to prose can almost always inform actors' character choices. It's notable that some of the only long passages of verse in Much Ado are spoken by the friar at Hero's wedding, a public, formal occasion. A foolish character named Dogberry also tries to use heightened, more formal language in his scenes when he's talking to upper-class characters, but he misuses the words to comic effect and fails to make his sentences come out in verse at all. It's also generally true that the tragedies employ more verse than the comedies, which tend to use prose as the language of wit and humor. But that rule isn't completely consistent either. The lovers and fairies in A Midsummer Night's Dream both use some dreamy, gorgeous verse, and one of Hamlet's most poignant queries is in prose, though he speaks mostly in verse in the rest of the play. As with most artistic rules, they exist to set a standard, and therefore the opportunity for an artist to break them when they want to defy our expectations and catch our ears off guard. Cam, let's examine Hamlet's words from Act 2, Scene 2.
I have of late, but wherefore I know not, lost all my mirth, forgone all custom of exercise, and indeed it goes so heavily with my disposition that this goodly frame, the earth, seems to me a sterile promontory. This most excellent canopy, the air, look you, this brave o'erhanging, this majestical roof fretted with golden fire. Why, it appears no other thing to me than a foul, pestilent, congregation of vapors.
In this speech, Hamlet's usual verse is interrupted by prose. Cam, what's the topic?
In this moment, he's feeling a deep sense of melancholy or depression. He even talks about the sky, the world, all the things he would originally deem as blessings. He sees them as meaningless and fleeting.
So maybe it makes sense that he can't summon the verse he uses for so many other topics in the play. Or maybe there's no need for poetry in verse to describe such a dull, heavy feeling. Though the imagery he uses to describe the way he should feel about the world is pretty vivid, and a bit more discriminating compared to usual speech, this little speech might be an example of heightened prose. It's definitely not verse, but neither is it the prose of more conventional language. Still, it probably hits the audience's ear differently to hear Hamlet drop the formality of the verse form and speak so plainly, without the meter or rhythm that verse prescribes, especially when he gets to the end of the thought and says the world seems foul and pestilent to him. As a side note, it's also worth noting that the brave overhanging, the magical roof fretted with golden fire, obviously refers to the sky and the sun, but also to the theater's partial overhang, since we know there were early performances of Hamlet at the Globe, among other places. So sometimes Shakespeare uses a switch from verse to prose not to indicate a character's social status or indicate a personality trait, but to create a more subtle tonal shift in a character's mood in a way that might impact the ear, but which the audience might or might not consciously note. When taking Shakespeare from the page to the stage, these are the things that actors must be aware of, so they can convey this, if only faintly, to an audience. Let's look at another couple speaking in prose, this time Kate and Petruchio in The Taming of the Shrew.
Husband, let's follow to see the end of this ado.
First, kiss me, Kate, and we will.
What, in the midst of the street?
What, art thou ashamed of me?
No, sir, God forbid. Ashamed to kiss.
Why then, let's home again. Come, Sirrah, let's away.
Nay, I will give thee a kiss. Now pray thee, love, stay.
Kate and Petruchio have spoken verse to each other throughout the play, but here at the end, once they're married and finally not fighting with each other anymore, they switch to prose. This might indicate a new softness and informality between them. It's also interesting that, like Beatrice, Kate is using prose to awkwardly explore the language of love and affection. So you can see how noting this change in form could be important and instructive to actors. In fact, that shift could even be seen as a piece of instruction to the actors from the playwright about how the characters are feeling about each other and how they might behave with each other at that moment in the play. Even their final lines to each other here, which sound like a rhyming couplet, aren't in pentameter. They're closer to Alexandrine form, which has 12 syllables per line. We can tell this by counting the syllables or trying to clap out the rhythm of iambic pentameter, as you'll remember from earlier lessons. So they rhyme with each other, a sign they're emotionally in sync, but their words still remain free from the stricture of the formal verse form. Let's look at one more example of prose, in which some rural characters note and discuss their own speaking style. Here are Audrey and Touchstone from As You Like It.
When a man's verses cannot be understood, nor a man's good wit seconded with the forechild understanding, it strikes a man more dead than a great reckoning in a little room. Truly I would the gods had made thee poetical.
I do not know what poetical is. Is it honest in deed and word? Is it a true thing?
No, truly. For the truest poetry is the most feigning, and lovers are given to poetry, and what they swear in poetry may be said as lovers. They do feign.
Do you wish then that the gods had made me poetical?
I do, truly. For thou swearest to me thou art honest. Now, if thou wert a poet, I might have some hope thou didst feign.
Would you not have me honest?
No, truly, unless thou wert hard-favored. For honesty coupled to beauty is to have honey, a sauce to sugar.
Well, I am not fair. Therefore, I pray the gods make me honest.
Truly. And to cast away honesty upon a foul slut were to put good meat into an unclean dish.
I am not a slut, though I thank the gods I am foul.
Well, praise be the gods for thy foulness.
Here we have Shakespeare actually commenting on the difference between those who speak prose and those who speak verse. Touchstone says he wishes Audrey had been speaking verse because verse is the language of deception, and he doesn't want her to love him, implying that if she speaks prose, she may be speaking truth. The rural character's mistrust of verse is humorous, and also makes me think of the speeches we heard from Julius Caesar in an earlier lesson, in which Brutus used prose for his earnest funeral oration, and Antony, ever the politician, chose verse for his. We can also hear the many antithetical images in the Audrey-Touchstone exchange, and the words each character borrows from the other in order to further the dialogue and each character's argument using witty wordplay. Words like poetical, honest, and slut are repeated so often that the actors know they must give them special weight and attention. As an actor myself, I generally circle words that are repeated or borrowed from another character in my scripts with a pencil, to remind me of that through line and the relative importance of those particular words in a scene. Most actors find that working on Shakespeare also helps them notice repetition of words and sounds in modern texts as well. While most modern texts have no verse to analyze, it's still true that modern playwrights are choosing each word with care, and the repetition of word or sound teaches us something about the importance of that word. As we mentioned earlier, the reasons why Shakespeare switches from verse to prose in his plays are varied, and we can see that no one clear rule can be applied in all cases. However, each time it happens, the actor must be a script detective and try to figure out what is gained by that switch, since it's clearly an intentional choice made by the playwright. And by understanding the general guidelines we've discussed, actors can use these verse-prose switches to make the most of the language their characters use and give the audience a richer experience of the play. In this course so far, we've explored many different ways Shakespeare uses contrasting sounds, contrasting words, and contrasting ideas to keep the audience guessing. And we've illustrated how these decisions make his language and characters so rich and interesting. From our work today, we can also see that his choice to use verse or prose for certain characters and scenes is yet another layer that actors can use to create and communicate character, and to further illuminate the relationships that characters have to each other that might not always be noticeable when reading one of his plays on the page. In the next lesson, we'll explore how Shakespeare brilliantly uses other conventions of language to make imagery come alive on the stage. See you then.